Hello, my name is Ekaterina Travkina. I'm a coordinator of the work on culture, creative industries and local development at the OECD Centre for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. And I'm very honored to be part of this session of the International Symposium of Science Museums. I'm here to speak about the OECD-ICOM guide for local governments, communities and museums. Before I do so, I wanted to share very briefly with you the note that we have just produced on the impact of the current crisis on cultural and creative sectors. And you may be quite interested to look at this note because we provide data on the impact on jobs and businesses across OECD regions. We also explain why we think the effects of this crisis will be quite long-lasting for a combination of factors. We also overview the different responses by national, local governments, the private sector and the philanthropy. And we provide also ways of how governments can also capitalize on culture in the recovery. So please feel free to share this with your colleagues in the economic development and employment and inclusion ministries, because we also provide recommendations on how these government policies can be better adapted to the needs of the sector. And now let's have a look at this OECD-ICOM guide for local governments, communities and museums. Maybe before we dive into it, I just wanted to say a few words to explain why the OECD was suddenly interested in this topic. It's because we see that over the past decades, maybe 40, 50 years, the mission of museums has been changing quite dramatically. And of course, their traditional mission is to preserve and pass the heritage from past generations to the future. But we also see that museums are increasingly becoming agents of economic and social change in the territories where they are present. So for us, it was quite natural to look at this broader role, broader local development role of museums. And because we see that they are part of urban regeneration strategies, working hand in hand with many local governments. They are very active in inclusion and well-being, innovation, and many other things that are very important for local development. So, and this is close to the heart of ministries of employment, inclusion, regional development, economic development, so our natural partners in the government. So that was a bit rational behind us stepping into this very exciting field. And we also see that many local governments, but also private foundations and the museum community themselves, they are increasingly interested in how to capture this broader impacts beyond direct economic impact of museums on the territory. So we thought maybe it's good for us, it's a good time for us to step into this field. So this guide was launched last year in 2009 at the Kyoto ICOM General Conference. And so what this guide includes. We focus on 5 themes, 4 thematic chapters deal with the impact of museums on economic development, on urban regeneration, on education and inclusion, and the 5th one explains how to bring it all together. So for each of the theme, we try to explain the potential impacts, and then we come up with this kind of action principles for both the museum and the local government, because the principle is that it's a self-assessment guide, both for the museum community, but also for the local government, because local government has to be a very active actor to ensure that the different departments within local government, economic development, inclusion and others, not just the cultural department, work in an integrated manner to help the museum and to work together with the museum to increase the impact. So that's the idea, that's the principle of the guide. Let's maybe start with this section on economic impact. So of course we all know that museums generate jobs, they bring in revenues through the visitors economy, tourists come and spend their money, and this can be quite important. For example, a few years ago in 2017, the American Alliance of Museums quantified that $12 billion were raised in taxes. So that's quite a significant amount. What's maybe also interesting is that the contribution of museums to innovation, and that of course requires a bit longer time to be seen, but it's also quite an impactful way to contribute to local development. And this comes from partnerships between museums, local entrepreneurs, businesses, and higher educational and research institutions. So here you can see the kind of actions we propose for local government and museums. And of course, it's about having an integrated tourism strategy, thinking about transportation links, thinking maybe about a guest card that combines transport and entry to museums and things like that, and also suggestions on how to better link up with the business community, with the research community on the territory. And here maybe I can just give you one small example. We've seen that in Trento, in Muse, the Trento Science Museum, they were the first one to create a fab lab, a fabrication laboratory in the whole region. So they were already offering this kind of service to the business entrepreneurs and to the region. So that's a very good innovation example for you. Let's maybe now have a look at the role of museums in urban regeneration. And of course, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when we speak about this is maybe the Sydney Opera House or the Pompidou Center in Paris, or Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. And these were, of course, very successful and highbrow, maybe territorial branding examples. But now it's quite a widespread thing in many OECD and non-OECD countries, obviously. And many local governments try to focus more on the local development aspect of this. So creating cultural or creative districts around the museum where artists, designers can live and work and produce things. And they do this through different arrangements, affording housing requirements, subsidized rents for workshop spaces for artists, aligning innovation and startup support to the need of creative firms, thinking about how to counter the effects of gentrification and things like that. So here you can see a number of options that the local governments and museums can take to increase the impact on urban regeneration. So now maybe let's move into the impact on education and creativity. It's a natural area where museums have always been present and very active. But now maybe we see that this mission is becoming even more broad and more complex because we move from education to also lifelong learning and not only, of course, focusing on native population, but also on migrants and also on marginalized communities. And here, one of the important things is that, well, of course, local governments need to recognize this broader role of museums in education and training. And when one says recognize, one means also providing access to funding for educational and social projects. So that's quite an important step. And of course, supporting cooperation with all sorts of different educational institutions or beyond schools, maybe vet schools, also universities, etc. And similarly, also for museums, broadening up their partnerships with the educational world of their territory. If we look into this role of museums as spaces for inclusion, health, and well-being, maybe now it's much easier to explain this dimension because during the COVID lockdown periods, we all saw how important access to culture is for our, well, mental health and well-being. And it was tremendous to see all this bold, courageous, inspiring innovations coming from the world of museums, opening for free their collections in a very inspiring and generous way. And here, so I think there is an increased attention to really the role of museums and in culture more broadly in helping with mental health and well-being. And here we can think also about initiatives that were already present for quite a number of years in many museums when they were working with schools on young children who were dropping out of schools, or with prisons sometimes for the rehabilitation of ex-offenders and so on, or maybe with some job centers to increase self-confidence of people so that their skills for employability are also increased. And this, of course, doesn't mean that museums are hospitals or job centers or prisons, but rather that they can meaningfully work and partner with these institutions for much increased impacts. So, and again, we sketch what local governments and what museums can be doing in this area. And importantly, in this part of the guide, we also speak quite a lot about how to evaluate this kind of programs. Of course, they are not very easily. It's not a very easy task, but there are several tips in the guide on that. So then, in the final chapter, of course, we try to bring this all together. And we try to underline that the museums can see themselves as agents of economic and social change, and also local governments should recognize them as such and help mobilize the different resources, financial, land, human, etc., to enable museums to play this broader role. And importantly, of course, we speak about access to different fundings. So as I was mentioning, maybe employment programs or inclusion or social programs, etc. And importantly, setting up the right evaluation frameworks. So just counting the number of tickets is maybe not anymore enough for good evaluation. And new evaluation frameworks should be set up to capture this broader role of museums that they can have on local development. And importantly, many local governments, of course, provide budget for a year, and this is typical for many OECD countries. 1 year obviously is not enough for this longer term local development impact. So this is another argument maybe to seek for longer term budget horizons also for museums, so that they can really unfold these new missions. So maybe I can also say a few words about how to use this guide. As I was saying, it's quite a practical tool. It's a self-assessment thing. So when you scroll and go through the guide, you'll see at the end this checklist, which can be used by the museum, the local government, all of them together, to see where they are, to evaluate what they do, and maybe to sketch a way forward. And we also obviously provide a lot of examples of places that were successful in doing different things. So very practical tool, self-assessment, you can do it by your own. You can also reach out to us or to ICOM if you want us to provide like a full-fledged assessment. And of course, please feel free to send us examples of different projects that you are doing on these different aspects: economic development, urban regeneration, inclusion, education, etc. So we are always interested in learning more and disseminating the good practices across. And so what we are trying to do now, of course, we are very eager to continue to promote and disseminate the guide. And it's being translated in quite a number of languages. So if you're interested, we would be also happy to translate it in even more languages. We continue to do these reviews on museums and local development using this guide. And we are now discussing with ICOM on how to set up a winter school on museums and local development to really work to bring together, this local government people and the museum community around these themes and these areas of work. So with that, I think I thank you very much, and here are my coordinates and our webpage. So I'll be very happy to receive any questions, and thank you.